Expansion is everything. This is what Cecil Rhodes told us from his wealthy perch and purchase of Prime Minister of Cape Colony in South Africa. He presided over the country of Rhodesia, which was named after him. It later became the countries Zimbabwe and Zambia. Expansion is everything. And what a claim that is, both the ultimate flag of the modern world to wave and the ultimate despair for it. Arendt opens the second section of the book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, called simply Imperialism, with a chapter dedicated to the overarching motivation that moved Europe from collapsing nation-state to expansionist, well, I'll offer the promise they imagined themselves, redemption. The bourgeoisie, the folks with wealth but not productivity, concerned that capitalism in Europe had reached its peak and that they would run out of the wealth that created their lifestyles. They knew that broader markets were needed. Business speculation abroad into less European countries was wildly dangerous, however, and so the nation-state had to be brought in to defend its interests. And so, over time, governments surrendered their adherence to conceptions like law and commonwealth and community for a politics of power and acquisition. For they understood, too, that in this narrative, if they did not grow in wealth, they might collapse, and wealth growth was aligned with growth in power itself. Besides, the neighboring countries were doing the same, so the competition for growth was on. As a short-term solution to many of its needs, including finding new places to put the unemployed and the criminal, expansion's a win. But we know, don't we, and a moment or two's reflection on this would create difficult questions, that unlimited expansion is an impossibility. Of course we know this. And while last time I mentioned that this kind of reflection seems impossible for most, indeed, it still seems nearly so to many of us who've been living this same narrative for well over a century, there's a fair amount of evidence that most saw it then too, including Cecil Rhodes. Knowing his limits, he said, "I would annex the stars if I could." And there's a Don Quixote moment for us, but with far greater consequence for the planet ever after. Because ultimately, infinite consumption in finite space means that we eat everything before us, including the property we sit upon and including ourselves. As Arendt says, the most radical form of possession is destruction, because only then can you guarantee that you actually owned it. And speaking of consumption, there's a wood chipper in the background. But I said that people at the time knew it, reflected on it. Early on in the imperialist years, and we're talking only about 30 years for Arendt's imagining of it, 1884 to about World War I, early on, the colonizers turned their superstition of eternal progress to a kind of nihilism, one that suggested doom ahead. I can't help but think about all the uber-wealthy apocalypse bunkers and survivalist lifestyles today. We know well where we are leading ourselves. But our capitalists brought the governments to these same positions, and now the nation-state was bent upon expansion of power. And the problem with this position, too, is that there can be no stability in such an ideology. The moment we slow and find calm and security is the same moment that we have stopped expanding. Power wanes because the status quo for power depends on acquiring more power. This means then that for the capitalist, for the power politician, there can never be peace, that there must always be a kind of violence at work, the image of power growing and accumulating, and property, whether it is land or business or even people, is always consumed, always diminishes. More disturbingly, and almost as an afterthought to this ultimate collapse and self-cannibalism, is that historically the bourgeois expansionists employed what Arendt names the mob to its doing, a malleable, uneducated group of the criminal and unproductive. They could become the cogs of this expansionist machine, first abroad and then at home. And the most powerful flag that they would be given to wave in defense of their own annihilation was one of national identity. And by this, Arendt means their people, their race. Race becomes politically one of the easiest narratives to foster to advance the imperialist agenda, the biological vice that must be eradicated. And race, from its narrowest to its broadest definitions, is what powers the discussion of most of the following chapters on imperialism.